the six-engine giant that was the biggest plane of the war. It's the 22nd of April, 1943. Over the blue Mediterranean, just 5 miles off the coast of a small peninsula in Tunisia called Cape Bon, something impossible is about to happen. 27 massive transport aircraft, lumbering across the sea at barely 136 miles per hour, are flying directly into a trap. None of them know it. Yet, the pilots think they have military escort. The commanders think the route is secure. Bhutan. A matter of minutes. The sky will turn violent, and what unfolds will be remembered as one of the most one-sided massacres in aviation history. And at the center of this catastrophe will be an aircraft so enormous, so ambitious, that Germany built it, believing that sheer size could overcome any vulnerability. Its name was the Messerschmitt Me 323 Gigant, and it was the largest transport plane that ever flew in World War II. The story of this giant doesn't begin with engines. It begins with a glider. Back in 1940, when Hitler was planning Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Great Britain, the German military faced a logistical nightmare. Bombing and paratroopers alone couldn't seize territory. You needed to land soldiers. You needed to land vehicles. You needed heavy equipment on the ground. The Luftwaffe looked at the problem and said, "We need an assault transport. Something massive. Something that could carry tanks, trucks, field guns, everything an invasion force would need." So, they built the Me 321. It was a glider, no engines, just canvas and wood, and a wingspan wider than a football field is long. A tug aircraft would haul it across the Somme Channel. It would cut loose, glide down, and dump its cargo directly onto enemy territory. The concept was elegant. The reality was a nightmare. Towing something that massive required 3 heavy fighters strapped to its belly with cables. A single burst of flak could snap those cables. A damaged landing meant the crew had no engines to try again. And Sea Lion never happened. By the time the glider was ready, Hitler had already turned his attention east. The Me 321 sat in warehouses, a solution to a problem that no longer existed. But then, the war in North Africa began to spiral out of control. Germany was bleeding men and supplies. Across the Mediterranean, the British were sinking ships. The sea route was becoming a graveyard. Someone in the Luftwaffe had an idea. What if we put engines on the glider? What if we turned this hauling machine into a powered aircraft? That's how the Messerschmitt Me 323 Gigant was born. And when it first flew in January of 1942, it was unlike anything anyone had ever built. 6 engines, counter-rotating propellers on each wing, a fuselage the size of a small warehouse. The statistics were staggering. It could carry 130 soldiers, or 25,000 pounds of ammunition, or fuel, lots of fuel. Pros. The wingspan stretched over 180 feet, longer than a B-17 bomber, longer than an entire German pursuit squadron lined up nose to tail. When that thing rolled down a runway, observers said, the ground itself seemed to shake. The Luftwaffe had created a flying truck. And they were about to find out that in a war where the enemy controlled the skies, a flying truck was just a very large, very slow target. By November of 1942, Me 323 squadrons, the unit was called Kampfgeschwader zur besonderen Verwendung, or Transport Wing, for special purposes, were flying regular missions from Sicily down to North Africa. Every day, these giants would lumber across the Mediterranean, packed with supplies for Rommel's Afrika Korps. Every day, they'd come back lighter. The routine was monotonous and dangerous, but it worked. For months, they supplied the desert war. One pilot alone, Ernst Peters, would log over 2,000 sorties. The aircraft absorbed punishment that would have killed smaller planes. One Me-320 flew home with a gaping hole in its wing, still had 3 functioning engines, limped back across the sea. They were indestructible, or so the Germans believed. But by spring of 1943, the situation in Tunisia was collapsing. Rommel was gone. The Afrika Korps was surrounded, and still Hitler insisted on reinforcement. No evacuation, no retreat. Just pour men and supplies into the furnace. The Luftwaffe knew the odds were impossible. Flying slow, heavy transports over contested waters in daylight was suicide. But they had their orders. So they loaded the Me-323s. They loaded them with fuel. 240 tons of highly volatile fuel, enough to power an entire Panzer division, enough to sustain a few more days of fighting, enough to keep the war going a little bit longer. The 22nd of April, 1943, pre-dawn at Trapani, Sicily, 27. Transport aircraft are being prepared. 27 Junkers, Ju-52s, and Messerschmitt Me-323s. The briefing is tense. The route has been changed at the last second. Instead of flying toward Cape Bon, an area marked as especially dangerous, they're going to fly toward Cape Farina, 75 kilometers farther west. The route is supposed to be safer. The Luftwaffe is assigning a fighter escort, 39 May, 109 fighters, from 2 separate squadrons. The operation is called, quite simply, another supply run. Just another day hauling supplies to a doomed army. 8:35 in the morning, the engines roar to life. These things are loud. Pilots say the noise is like standing inside an active volcano. The formation climbs, circles, and then turns south toward Africa. The Ju-52s fly in one formation, tight and disciplined. The Me-323s fly lower, to the left, in a diamond pattern. Each one of those giants is crewed by 5 men. Each one carries dozens of soldiers, fuel, ammunition. But there's a problem, and the Germans don't know about it yet. On the hills above Trapani, an Pan Italian informant has been sending radio signals. The Germans have no idea. He's already told the Allies exactly what's coming, the size of the formation, the time of departure, the route, the escort strength, everything. By the time the transports are halfway across the two-made Mediterranean, the Allies have mobilized every fighter squadron within range. They're waiting. Patient, hungry. 40 kilometers away, the Allied fighters are in the sky, engines roaring, altitude climbing. P-40 Warhawks, Spitfires, Kitty Hawks from South Africa. The moment, the past. Transports are spotted. The order comes down. Go, attack, no mercy. The first warning the Germans get comes over the radio. Enemy aircraft. Enemy aircraft. Va. Enemy aircraft. Multiple contacts. The pilots of the Me-323s do what they can. They're flying at just 50 meters above the water. That's 3 stories. No altitude to climb, no speed to run. All they can do is scatter. But these aircraft don't scatter. They're too big. When a Ju-87 turns, it happens slowly. When a Me-323 tries to maneuver, the whole fuselage creaks and groans. They're built to carry freight. NATO dogfight, the first pass of Allied fighters, rips through the formation. The P-40s open fire with their machine guns and cannons. The P-40s rounds slam into the wooden wings, the water-covered fuselages, the engines, and something. And catastrophic happens. These aircraft are made almost entirely of wood, plywood, and spruce, and fabric. Most of the else time. Wood absorbs damage. Shell holes that would destroy a metal plane don't bring down a plane. Wooden one. A Me-323 could take a beating. But today, those aircraft aren't just carrying fuel. Today, they're carrying ignitable fuel, highly flammable cargo, packed into a tight fuselage. When the first Me-323 takes a hit, it doesn't limp away. It burns. A small flame appears in the wing root, then a larger one. The fire spreads across the wooden surface like wildfire. Within seconds, the entire wing is a torch. The aircraft doesn't slowly descend into the sea. It becomes a fireball, a comet. It plunges into the Mediterranean, trailing black smoke and flame. The crew dies inside the cockpit. The soldiers in the cargo hold never have a chance. The second Me-323 catches fire. Then the third and the fourth. The Allied fighters make passes. They aim for the engines. They aim for the wings. They aim for anything that moves. And every hit sets something ablaze. The transports try to return fire. They have N.F. gun positions along the wings, machine guns mounted in the fuselage. Some of the Me-323 crews fight back desperately. Several of them manage to shoot down Allied fighters. 5, 6, 7 Allied planes are sent down into the sea. But mathematics are brutally simple. For every German aircraft that survives a pass, 3 others catch fire. For every Allied fighter that goes down, 5 Gigants explode. The Ju-52s are different. They're smaller. They're faster. When the Allies come in hot, the Ju formations turn and scatter. Some of them make it through to Tunisia. They arrive with bullet holes in their fuselage and stories of a bloodbath. The escort fighters are supposed to help. That's why they're there. But the escortists, flying with the Ju-52s, they're nowhere near the Me-323s. By the time they realize what's happening, by the time they try to get into position to defend those giants, it's already over. The massacre is complete. 14 Messerschmitt Me 323s have been shot down. 14 massive transport aircraft. Out of 27 in the formation, 14 into the sea. 140 crew members were aboard those aircraft. And one of the most brutal facts of that day is this: only 19 of those men survived. 121 German airmen died in a few minutes of combat. They didn't die in battle. They died in an ambush, trapped in slow aircraft over open water with nowhere to run and no hope of escape. The final Me-323 is shot down by a Flight Lieutenant Edwards, flying a Flight Kitty Hawk. He comes in behind the giant, the sun at his back, and fires a long burst into the fuselage. The aircraft shudders. The flames bloom orange and terrible. It tilts toward the water. The crew makes no attempt to bail out. There's no time. There's no altitude. The water is coming up fast. The giant hits the surface and disintegrates. The pilots who watch this understand what they've witnessed. This isn't a victory. This is the execution of something that never stood a chance. And here's what makes this moment matter. The Me-323 was proof of a fundamental problem with German strategy. Germany had built an aircraft so large, so ambitious, that it could do almost anything. It could carry a panzer tank. It could haul enough fuel to sustain an entire division. It could land in rough terrain. It could handle damage that would destroy smaller aircraft. But there was one thing it couldn't do. It couldn't survive in a 10-contested sky. The moment Germany lost air superiority, the moment they stopped controlling the skies over the Mediterranean, the Gigant became a liability, a beautiful, piece of kin. Engineering, an impressive logistical achievement, but ultimately, a very large, very slow target. The Germans knew this. After Cape Bon, they stopped flying these aircraft by day. They moved to night missions. And as the war ground on, the Me-323 squadrons were shattered. By 1944, most of these giants had been shot down. By 1944, 5, they were gone. The last ones crashed into Russian steppe, hauling supplies for an army that was itself marching toward collapse. What the Me-323 represents is desperation. It's Germany's attempt to solve a flogus logistics problem with sheer engineering. Build something bigger. Build something tougher. But you can't engineer your way out of air superiority. And that's what doomed the Gigant. Not design, not the engineering, not the skill of the crews. It was the simple, brutal fact that by 1943, Germany didn't own the skies anymore. The skies belonged to the Allies. And anything that flew through Allied airspace was prey. When you watch the footage of that final Me-323 going down, when you see the photographs of the wreckage washed ashore in Tunisia, when you read the combat reports from the pilots who shot them down, you're witnessing the moment when technology met reality. A German design bureau in Augsburg could dream up anything, could build it, could make it work, but they couldn't make it invincible. And the cost of that lesson was the lives of 121 men in a few minutes, 484 aircraft lost to Allied action during Operation Flax, and ultimately an entire war lost. The Messerschmitt Me-323 Gigant wasn't defeated by a better aircraft. It was defeated by the Allies' ability to put more fighters in the sky than Germany could shoot down. It was defeated by time, by logistics, by numbers, by the sheer weight of an industrial machine that Germany could never match. But you watch this because you understand that. You watched because the story of this aircraft is the story of the entire German war effort. Big ambitions, incredible engineering, and ultimately insufficient resources to achieve those ambitions in the face of a determined enemy. The Messerschmitt Me 323 Gigant flew because Germany needed it to fly. It died because Germany couldn't protect it. And in that arc, from triumph to tragedy, lies the entire story of World War II. So here's the question for you. Do you think Germany could have ever solved this problem differently? Could they have protected these transports with better fighter escorts? Or was the Cape Bon massacre inevitable, the moment Germany lost air superiority over the phrase Mediterranean? Drop your answer in the comments and hit the like button if you think this video deserves to be seen by more people. YouTube will push it out to channels like this and help us keep making these stories. Next week, we're uploading something even darker. The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka, the aircraft that terrorized Europe, the plane that could dive straight down and hit targets with terrifying accuracy. But what happened when Stukas met enemy fighter planes? Subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching.